Legion of Superheroes: Hostile World is the first volume of the new Legion of Superheroes series that is part of DC Comics' attempt to relaunch their entire universe in their New 52 initiative. The book is written by Legion alum Paul Levitz and drawn by Francis Portela, and for one issue, Walt Simonson. Reading this book was quite a different experience than what I had when I read the first volume of Action Comics and Superman. With both of those books, I had heard plenty of people give their opinions about them, so try as I might, I had expectations going in. But Legion of Superheroes was one of the New 52 titles that I heard nothing about, positive or negative. So my reaction to this book was more pure than what I had to the other titles from this relaunch. That's not to say that my opinions I expressed in my reviews of the Superman titles from the New 52 were not my own. They most definitely were my own thoughts and words, but I had some idea of what to expect in those books, while I did not with Legion of Superheroes. Recently, I read and reviewed a Marvel Comics storyline that is only a few years old, Time Storm 2009-2029. My chief complaint with that book was that it pushed too many characters into the story, and as a result, almost none of them got any spotlight, and none of them got enough spotlight for me to consider them fleshed out or interesting by the end of the story. So what does this have to do with Legion of Superheroes? Well, for about half of this book, I had the exact same problem. In fact, DC Comics, and this series in particular, are both very lucky that I did not read this series as it came out in single-issue format. I felt like the first 4 issues of this 7-issue collection were easily the worst part of this book, which is a shame since it's also the meat of the book. The story in the first 4 issues involves the Dominators, a species of aliens who have been the go-to bad guys for the Legion since the 1980s. The Dominators are trying to incite insurrection on the planet of Daxam. Daxam is a planet very similar to Krypton. While Kryptonians briefly get sick when they are exposed to radioactive pieces of their home world, Daxamites become fatally ill and permanently so when they are exposed to lead, or as this book mentions, any heavy metals. The Dominators have one Daxamite called the Renegade working for them. He believes that Daxam is a prison, and once the Dominators cure all the Daxamites, they will be free to leave this prison and do as they please. Daxamites are not allowed to leave the planet because of the high levels of lead and other heavy metals outside of their home world. So the Legion is trying to stop this guy from leading a revolt against the galactic government called the United Planets. This story is problematic because, much like Marvel's Time Storm story, I couldn't latch on to any of the characters in the first 4 issues. By my count, in the first issue alone, there are at least 21 members of this team introduced to us. I understand that it is called the Legion of Superheroes, so it should be a very large team. But they don't have to be all crammed into one issue. With a team this large, a creator should lean towards stories that only involve maybe 6 members of a very large team, and then rotate the characters that are used in each story. Or, since this story introduces a couple of characters who, as far as I know, are new additions to the Legion, the story should revolve around them learning anything and everything about the Legion as the audience does. We can be inside their heads and find out that, oh, Shadowlass and Mon-El used to date. Good to know. And then, any time exposition is thrown in our face, it doesn't feel forced, because Dragon Breath Girl doesn't know any of this that the audience is finding out for the first time. So there's a reason for it to be spoken aloud. This is the best way to ease someone into a franchise like this that isn't as well known as one of DC's flagship titles like Superman or Batman. I'm not just talking about people who have maybe never read an issue of Legion of Superheroes and might be confused. This definitely applies to those people, but I'm also talking about myself. I like the Legion quite a bit, but I'm definitely a sophomore fan, if you will. I have no more than 5 Legion graphic novels. My knowledge basically extends to the names and costumes of most of the more famous characters. But when a new creative direction comes around, and most of the members of the team have redesigned costumes, or there are just way too many characters in a story, then it's hard for even someone like myself who likes the Legion, but is then very over his head, to get invested in this comic book. Again, let me say that if I was sampling the first issue of every one of the New 52 titles as they came out, as some reviewers did, I most certainly would have dropped this title after the first issue. The conflict is very confusing at first, and it only becomes more clear in the next few issues. I'm not saying that storytellers should give away the farm all in the first issue, but let's at least make the milk from the cow taste good so that people will want to come back for more. This means make the story understandable, so that it doesn't take a lifelong fan of the Legion who has every issue of the series to understand what's going on. Not only is the plot too difficult to understand at first, but this story just seems too simple to last 4 whole issues. I know that's a contradiction, but it's true. After reading the whole book, it was my understanding that the Dominators needed to be set up before any of the other stories so that we can then continue seeing them show up in the background for a few more storylines until another story that features them as part of the A-plot once again. And that's understandable. But for a story that basically amounts to the Dominators are trying to manipulate the people of Daxam for their own evil purposes, this story really could have been done in 2 or 3 issues, and then the series could move on to more interesting things. Instead, this story lasts for 4 issues, and it's painful that it does. It was definitely issue 5 of this book that saved this series for me. This issue is very light on the story, and takes the entire issue just to show us a quiet day in the life of almost the entire team. This reminds me of one of the earliest issues of Marv Wolfman and George Perez's The New Teen Titans, which did something very similar to this. When you have a team that the audience might not be familiar with at all, taking an issue just to show us their interactions with each other, what their personalities are like, and what makes them different from any other superhero, that can be very helpful. I would be lying if I said that Walt Simonson's art didn't have anything to do with me liking this issue, though. I don't mean this as a slight against Francis Portela, but I certainly wish that Walt Simonson had been drawing this entire series instead of just one of the issues. After finally getting acclimated to the entire team, the book finishes off with a 2-issue story about a team of superheroes called the Red Dragons who are trying to bring China back to its former glory. The conclusion of this book is really what I was looking for when I got into this book in the first place. The book doesn't feel the need to include every single Legionnaire in this conflict, and so the few who are involved in this story have room to breathe, and I can get comfortable with them. Also, I feel like the Red Dragons are just all around more interesting than the Dominators. The Red Dragons have a goal and a purpose for doing what they are doing. They want to restore China to an era that they liked. I'm not sure what era of China they're idolizing, if it is the past for the audience, or if it's in the past for the Legion but in the future for the audience, but I don't really need that information. All I know is that these bad guys have a goal and an ideology that puts them opposite of the Legion. This is something the Dominators were lacking in the first 4 issues of this series, and also in any other comic I've read with the Dominators. I prefer villains to have some kind of motivation so that the actions they take in the story make sense, and you can see those actions leading to the endgame the villains have planned. If the villain has no noticeable goals and is just doing stuff because they are the bad guys, then that is a problem that usually keeps me from wanting to read more of that series. Honestly, I'm very glad I had the patience to stick through this series, and I'm especially glad that I only buy trade paperbacks and graphic novels these days. Otherwise, it's very likely I would have missed out on what is maybe my favorite title from the New 52 so far. It started out slow and rough, but if the rest of the series is as good as the last 3 issues of this book, then I cannot wait to continue reading this series. This book definitely has a buy now recommendation from me.